So, what do you think was the most important thing that you learned about Jesus of Nazareth that grasped, that got your attention, that made you say, huh, okay, this is what's going on here?
Well, I think there's one central claim, right, of all of Christianity that matters more than any other claim. It's the claim of the resurrection. Because Paul tells us this in 1 Corinthians 15. If this isn't true, well, then there's no authority in the voice of, first of all, it's all a lie, because every claim related to Jesus centers on his deity as demonstrated by the resurrection. Look at the preaching of every apostle in the book of Acts. It's all going to come back to that foundational event, the resurrection, and that they were eyewitnesses of that resurrection, in which he did many, as Peter says in Pentecost, many signs, wonders were performed by Jesus, including the resurrection, which demonstrated that this is the man predicted by the Old Testament. So it all comes down to that. And so for me, it all came down to that. It's like we always say, Frank Turk and I say this a lot, that if you're somebody who rises from the dead, I have a tendency to pay attention. That is the truth of what separates Jesus from other historic wise teachers. And that's what, for me, it all came down to really working on this one issue. I would never have been open to the idea that anyone in history could ever rise from the grave.
And around what year did this kind of take place?
Well, I was 35, so it was 96-ish.
So did you draw upon scholars, or was this you sat down and only applied your method? Like, we now have just an overabundance. I mean, there's there's Lee Strobel that you mentioned, there's Frank Turk, there's just a whole slew of people that we can turn to. Like Gary Habermas has come and spoken to a group by our college, and I think we've come to understand more about the transmission of the gospel and just different argumentation that have gone out of vogue and then come back in, and new ones that have been made. Were there people that you relied upon on, or was this kind of you sat down and you just applied the method that you describe in stuff like cold case Christianity?
Yeah, so I can honestly say that back in 96, I know that Lee's book had just come out, maybe a couple of years earlier. I wasn't familiar with it.
The Case for Christ.
Yeah, I just didn't know about it. He was actually about a year later on our staff at Saddleback Church, at the church where I was attending. But I just didn't know much about his book in time to really. And I think really, if you look at that book, it kind of started an explosion of apologetics, because all of the people who he introduced in that book, I think, were largely unknown at the time, or were just starting to really become known in the popular imagination. Mm-hmm. And his interviewed people now, everyone knows who those folks are.
Yeah.
Maybe it was just me being a non-Christian, that I just didn't know that there was a whole field of work out there. I didn't even know Josh McDowell, evidence that demands a verdict.
Yeah.
I just didn't have access to those resources. I knew, though, the template that I use to determine if an eyewitness is reliable. And so you'll see in my book, I think I might refer to some experts in the book, but really the book doesn't do that. I'm also extremely, and I'll just tell you guys this, and I tell it to a lot of people. If you got a PhD behind your name, that doesn't have a lot of weight for me. Only because in my criminal trials, both sides will trot out somebody with letters behind their name, speaking about the exact same piece of evidence in front of the jury. And both people who have letters behind their name will say that the best inference is exactly the opposite from the first guy. So it turns out that if you just rely on experts, we ask the jurors to go back to what it is they are talking about. So for me, the most it would have been helpful, I think, is if I'd have known who these experts were, so I could be pointed back to what it is they were talking about. Because in the end, I asked jurors to go back to the evidence. Remember, this expert's just giving you his inference from the evidence, but you get to make your own inference from the evidence. You don't have to agree with that expert on either side. Now, it's good to have a broad spectrum of people who give you their opinion about what this best inference is. But if you go to my talks, for example, you will not hear me trot out the names of experts. So-and-so says this about the gun. I don't care what anybody says about it. Let me show you what the base evidence looks like, and you can make your own decision. That's what my talks are all about. I do not cite experts.